The Pentagon building was built in the early 40s on what is called the Hell Swamp, the wasteland of Arlington. The idea of building a Pentagon of gigantic proportions came to the minds of secret officials of the departments who managed U.S. foreign relations. The building itself has unique architectural features that have attracted researchers for several decades. The world's media, including the most influential ones, such as the BBC, report that the Pentagon's special services are trying their best to prevent information about their work from getting out and are trying to protect the secrets of the Pentagon by literally buying up and destroying thousands of copies of books exposing the activities of the department. This happened with a former American Army officer who served in Afghanistan and began to tell the truth in his memoirs. The series of terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001 also raises many mysteries. The American mega-Pentagon was then chosen as one of the targets. What secrets do Pentagon bosses want to hide? What is hidden behind the attack on this building during the largest terrorist attack in human history by number of victims? And why do some researchers claim that most of the Pentagon's buildings are hidden underground? Today we will talk about one of the most protected places on the planet, the impregnable fortress of the U.S. Department of Defense. The United States government put a lot of effort into the security of the Pentagon. Books about the Pentagon were actually destroyed in entire editions. Some of them had already been printed, so the American intelligence services, sparing no expense from taxpayers, carried out secret events during which they bought back thousands of copies even before they will hit store shelves. In his book, Lieutenant Colonel Anthony Shaffer hit where the Pentagon hurt most, and he paid for it. Here's what April Cunningham, a lieutenant colonel and official spokesman for the department, had to make excuses. The Department of Defense has decided to purchase the first printing of the book because it contains information that could be harmful to national security. They don't even hide their actions, and 9,500 copies of the book were destroyed. It was now 2010, and the Inquisition and the burning of literature were still being practiced. By the way, something similar happened in Germany going crazy in the 30s. To brighten up the picture for the public and create the appearance of freedom of speech, Schaffer was allowed to publish a second edition of the book. True, this required removing individual words, names, and entire paragraphs from 299 pages. Users in online stores then left quite appropriate comments. For example, "I will not buy a book because it has been censored, and where is it in the Pentagon budget to buy 10,000 copies of a printed book?" And it all started with the fact that the American government decided to place the entire leadership of the United States Department of Defense in one place. At first, the plan seemed too ambitious. The mega-Pentagon was supposed to accommodate 26,000 employees, comparable in scale to the size of a small city. And according to closed technical documentation, the facility was supposed to accommodate up to 40,000 people. It was also planned to give employees the opportunity to park 10,000 personal and company cars in the immediate vicinity of the building. The flames of World War II were then flaring up in Europe, and the superpowers were saving resources. But the Americans were persistent in their intentions and did not spare money. The very idea of keeping the entire military leadership of the country under the roof of one building seems unreasonable. Experts who study the issue say that during the Cold War, the Pentagon even earned the nickname Ground Zero. It was assumed that if a nuclear war with the Soviet Union did break out, the first missiles would strike the Pentagon. And if we take into account the fact that the facility was erected during the World War, the logic of the American generals would seem to be even more lame. Of course, the presence of secret bunkers makes it possible to hide from bombing, but what about the physical capture of the building? Why is it necessary to risk the lives of all senior officers at once? There is no clear answer to these questions, but most likely the U.S. leadership has some data that allowed them to make just such a decision. You certainly can't call them fools. As soon as the President of the United States gave the go-ahead, the best architects began searching for the optimal location. Residents say that in the town of Arlington, the bosses of the American What the military department liked most was that the plot of land was delineated by 5 roads, some of them intersecting at an angle of 108 degrees. For some reason, the masters of geometry were eager to build a regular pentagon, which the ancient Greeks called the Pentagon. The area itself was swampy, and Arlington Cemetery was located nearby. However, this was not the basis for moving construction to another location. The choice was agreed upon at the very top. Judging by the initial design, the building fit perfectly into the transport infrastructure, but the government soon decided that if the Pentagon was built on this site, it would block the view of Washington. Therefore, right before the start of construction work, the building was moved, but the unique project was left unchanged. They say that Roosevelt himself, at the request of his wife, ordered the Pentagon to be moved half a mile for aesthetic purposes. We can only guess about the true reason for this decision. The construction of the facility took place in record time. 2 years later, the largest office building in the world, owned by one owner, was commissioned. This owner was and is the U.S. Department of Defense. The building's 5 facades overlook shopping arcades, the river, its own metro station, parking, and a special helipad. According to official data, the U.S. Department of Defense headquarters building has 5 above-ground floors, and 2 more are hidden underground. But researchers have many questions about the underground part of the building. We will return to this later. The extensive network of tunnels and corridors is amazing. Each floor consists of 5 pentagon-shaped rings and 11 interconnecting corridors. Thanks to the unique layout, you can get from one point of the building to any other in just 7 minutes. This ergonomics is associated with the properties of the geometric figure itself. The total length of the corridors exceeds 28 kilometers, and the area of the top 5 floors alone is more than 600,000 square meters. It's incredibly huge. The Pentagon's total office space is almost twice that of the Empire State Building. It is interesting that in the early 40s, during the construction of the structure, the architects made twice as many toilets as required, separately for whites and separately for blacks. Of course, this was done not with the aim of increasing comfort, but for other, less good reasons. True, the corresponding signs were never hung on the doors. They say that Franklin Roosevelt personally intervened. Researchers are wondering why it was necessary to give the building this particular shape. The diagonals of the Pentagon form a pentagram, and the points of intersection of the diagonals in a regular pentagon are the points of the golden ratio. The Pentagon seems to consist of an infinite number of smaller pentagons, which are formed by the points of intersection of the diagonals. By the way, a regular pentagon with a pentagram enclosed in it is a symbol of the sacred union of Pythagoras. Some researchers suggest that the Pentagon is only a visible part of the dodecahedron hidden underground. However, technically it would most likely be impossible to implement such a project. Plato, by the way, considered this geometric body to be ideal. The great philosopher claimed that it was him that God used to create the universe as a model. Not everyone in America is happy with the Pentagon's policies. In October 1967, citizens of the United States held a large-scale protest against the Vietnam War called the March on the Pentagon. The number of participants in it exceeded 100,000 people. First, demonstrators held a rally at the Lincoln Memorial, and then moved towards the headquarters of the U.S. Department of Defense. The hordes of people, who were not in the best of spirits, struck terror into the generals on staff, and the protesters were met by police and National Guard troops. September 11, 2001 is inextricably linked with the history of the Pentagon. According to official data, on this day at 9:37 a.m., a passenger Boeing crashed into the wing of the building where the Naval Command was located. Part of the building collapsed, killing 125 Pentagon workers and 64 airline passengers. President George W. Bush gave a speech after these events in which he said that the wounds of this building will not be forgotten. What exactly he meant, revenge on terrorists or something else, is a mystery. there is a version that the events of September 11 were an operation of the special services with the aim of strengthening the powers of the state's security forces. The fight against terrorism was just a pretext. American society, which had been relatively free up to this point, was immediately squeezed by the new laws. And the rights of police and intelligence agencies have expanded significantly in terms of searches, the use of weapons and other areas that directly affect the basic constitutional rights of U.S. citizens. Researchers who support this view argue that the damage to the building was too small given that it was rammed by a 100-ton ship traveling at 300 kilometers per hour. It is also suspicious that at the time of the strike this particular wing of the Pentagon was undergoing redevelopment, and most of its employees were transferred to other offices. Such versions are popular among millions of residents of the United States, but the White House has failed to convince them otherwise. 20 years after the tragedy, more than 50% of Americans continue to believe that the government did not reveal the whole truth about the terrorist attacks. According to official information, all the wreckage of the Boeing that crashed into the Pentagon, except for the black box, burned out in a fire. Purely theoretically, this could be true. Black box recordings proved that the plane had been hijacked by terrorists. However, many serious researchers argue that it was not a plane that hit the building, but a missile from the U.S. military. By the way, which version of the events of September 11 do you adhere to? Write in the comments. One of the main improvements to the Pentagon after the disaster was the complete renovation of the building's windows, replacing them with armored ones. It is said that the outer walls were reinforced and made blast-proof. The elevators leading to the metro stations were also closed. General security measures have also been significantly enhanced. Secret Pentagon data periodically leaks onto the internet. Sometimes you don't even need WikiLeaks for this, and Russian hackers have nothing to do with it either. As the Washington Post reported, information about secret U.S. facilities appeared on an interactive map displaying the activity of fitness tracker users. Of particular interest was activity in war zones in the Middle East, Africa, and Afghanistan. The jogging routes coincided with amazing accuracy with the coordinates of American military bases. The Pentagon promised taxpayers to look into the situation. However, this was only followed by orders to subordinates to be more careful when handling gadgets. A huge scandal occurred in 2008, when Google posted detailed panoramas of a military base in Texas on its maps. The Pentagon then used its favorite tactics and declared that the information posed a potential threat to national security, which was followed by a ban on Google to film panoramas in garrisons. Satellite maps are a complete headache for the Pentagon. As Google admits, at the request of the military, they regularly have to blur out images of certain objects on maps. However, secrets become apparent much more often than the bosses from the U.S. military department would like. One of the most interesting finds on the internet is the secret American air base at Yucca Lake in Nevada. The base was declassified in 2011 thanks to the map service. It's funny that due to the abundance of search engines, it is possible to delete information asynchronously, and the same objects can be blurred out on one map and at the same time remain on another. Moreover, any attentive person, having studied the maps, can identify obscured locations and see how these places look in other services. With spots of retouching, the Pentagon seems to be telling users, "It's covered up for a reason, look in this place." The intelligence services of other countries, for example, China, also do not sleep and have studied everything a long time ago. And German media reported that hackers gained access to information about employees of the U.S. Department of Defense and to the department's secret information. The Pentagon says its commercial suppliers' networks were hacked. We are talking about the hacking of data relating to the travel of Defense Department employees. Personal data and credit card information of Pentagon employees leaked. About 30,000 workers have been declassified. So in terms of cybersecurity, not everything is so smooth for the American defense monster. The media also report blatant cases of corruption. In 2019, a scandal erupted in the United States over billions of American taxpayer dollars wasted in Afghanistan. For a decade and a half, various U.S. government agencies have been building unused or poorly maintained infrastructure in Afghanistan to the tune of an astonishing $2.5 billion. The most noticeable role in the misuse of budget funds belongs to the Pentagon. Inspectors found that almost 30% of assets were unused, abandoned, or destroyed. For example, a built academy for female police officers never functioned due to the Afghan government's moratorium on training women. 16 transport aircraft for the Afghan military worth $486 million were destroyed for various reasons and cut into scrap metal, and classes were never held in a specially built school due to the disgusting quality of electrical equipment. And there are dozens of such examples. Oversight agencies continually discover violations in contracts for the needs of the U.S. Armed Forces. For example, the Pacific Fleet regularly forgets to indicate which foreign contractors it pays for work. In Japan, 600 people were not taken into account, and in South Korea, the number of those actually hired exceeds those listed on paper by tens of times. But as long as the American printing press is working properly, the U.S. government can safely turn a blind eye to such trifles. After all, there will be no punishment. Perhaps we'll stop here, because you can talk about the secrets of the Pentagon for hours, and your time is not rubber. Evaluate the issue fairly and write what you think about all this. See you in future episodes on our channel.